Right, working with nodes. Before we jump in, make sure you download this image and pull it all the way to the end, as this will be our Euroframe. No need to make any tweaks to it as it is already graded. Next, you want to go up here to clip and just zoom in a little bit. It's just going to make the nodes a little bigger for better explanation. So this area over here is your node graph. This is where you will be working all the time when you are color grading, and all the adjustments that you make down here on the adjustment tools that will be affected in the nodes in the node graph. You can disable it or enable it. If you right click it, you're going to get this menu over here, and it has the option that says add node. This is not the same as right clicking on a node. That's going to give you this menu, and if you now say add node, you have these different options. We're going to start first with the serial node because that is the most common node, and also the default that Resolve adds to your clip when you open the color page. Before we start making tweaks and adding more nodes, it's really important to also understand this bit over here and this bit over there. The one on the left represents your source. So this would be your camera footage. So the source where the clip is coming from, and the one at the end over here represents your output. So that is where the final output is going. At least if you're only working on a clip basis. If you're working on a timeline as well, this one over here would represent this one over there. So the source from here will go to your timeline source, and then that's your final display. But for now, we're just going to stay on clip level. In order to explain what a serial node does, we need to make more than one, because then we can see how it impacts each other. So a shortcut for that is Alt S or Option S on a Mac. I'm on a Mac, and Alt S creates another one. And if you want to create a node before the one you have selected, press Shift and S. So you can see the node number has changed. So undo, this is node number 1, Shift S. Now this is node number 1 and this is node number 2. Let's just undo that. Now if this represents your source and this represents your output, then logically the flow will be from left to right. The way serial nodes work is that whatever you change in the first node directly affects the node after it. So if I make a change in this node, it's going to be impacted on this one as well. The first way to illustrate this would be to decrease the saturation all the way to 0 on the first node. Look how these are changing. So if I were to go to the second node now and pull the saturation all the way up, there's absolutely nothing happening because it has no color information to work with, because it's working with this black and white image. Another way to explain it would be to reset these nodes. Go to the second one and click on the qualifier. Start painting on the jacket and press Shift H. So just paint and try and isolate as much of the jacket as possible without affecting the rest of the image. That's fine. I'm not trying to get a perfect key here. It's just an example, and press Shift H again. What I've just done is I've isolated this specific shade of blue. You can see it's over there. So if I make an adjustment, it's only going to affect the area that I've selected with the keyer. So I'm going to pull the hue over here, and let's make it sort of a purple / magenta color over there. Now I'll go back to your first node, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to warm the image up quite drastically, and that's going to affect what's happening over here. Remember, this key is expecting a specific shade of blue, so if I make it warmer, it's going to affect it over here. So go to offset and pull it all the way to the yellow side, and immediately you can see the jacket is blue again, and we have nothing over here because our first node directly affects the second node. And this is where we start differentiating between different nodes. Your serial nodes are going to work best when doing primary adjustments. Primary adjustments is basically anything that you change in the image that has a global effect. If you want to warm up the entire image, that's a primary adjustment. If you want to bring down the exposure or boost it, that's a primary adjustment. The three most common primary adjustments are exposure, color balance, and saturation. So usually I would add a label over here. So you can go and say node label and say exposure, node label and balance, and node label and saturation. As we dive into my power grades later, I will elaborate a little bit more about the extra nodes that you can add over here. Some people like to have a contrast node between the balance and exposure. It depends on the project, but these are the three most common adjustments. It is crucial to dial in your image with these adjustments first before moving on to secondary adjustments. A secondary adjustment is anything where you want to make a tweak to a certain part of the image, like what we did earlier when we selected the jacket with the qualifier. So any change that you want to make to a part of the image without affecting the rest of the image, that's called a secondary adjustment. And for this, we're going to use a different node. So let's delete these two, right click on this one and say add node, and we're going to talk about parallel nodes. Immediately this looks different compared to the serial node because we have the split over here going into the two nodes and then these two nodes feeding back into this parallel mixer. We'll do the same thing we did with our first example on the serial nodes, and we'll play with the saturation. So I'm going to go minus all the way to 0, and over here I'm going to add 50 back, so that would be 100. And there we are, 100% back to the original image. And what that is telling us is that these two nodes are working in combination together, both feeding from the same source and going back into the same output. So essentially, it works with addition and subtraction. In the first node, we subtracted the saturation with 50 all the way to 0. In the second node, by increasing it to 100, we took it back to 50, restoring it to the original image. In other words, it's non-destructive. And the only thing that matters is what is being fed here into the parallel mixer. Now, just before I move on to the next type of node, I want to drive my point home with a more visual example. Now, we are going to be working with this gray image over here. It's not exactly visual, but I'm going to explain now. You have to download it if you want to follow along, but you also want to open your scopes. So go to the waveform and make it bigger. If you don't know your way around the scopes yet, don't sweat. It's not necessary for this example, but in chapter 2, you will become well acquainted with it. So we're going to start with the serial node up here. Going to create a new serial node, Alt S, click on the first node and go to this box over here, which is the power windows. This is covered very well in chapter 3, but for now you can just follow along. I'm going to select a circle over here, and that is going to draw a mask. So in this moment, everything inside the circle is selected. And if I were to make a tweak, let's say boost the exposure, you can see how it's only affecting the inside. So I'm going to pull it to around here on the 70% mark. Let's just make it 1.40. Then I'm going to say Control C or Command C, and I'm going to paste it onto the second node. I'm basically duplicating this effect onto this node. And then I'm going to reset this adjustment. If I wanted to bring it back to the middle, mathematically, I would have had to reduce it with 40, right? So let's go over here and bring it back to 40, so that would be 60. Already I can see what's happening. It's not going back to the same place. It's going lower. That's because the proportion has changed. Essentially, the starting image that we worked with over here was a brighter circle. And as we brought it down in proportion, it went down lower. Now let's do the same with a parallel node. So add node, parallel, and copy and paste. And we're going to reset this adjustment, and I'm going to pull it down to 60. Look what happens. Right on the money. So it's basically addition and subtraction. Non-destructive, feeding from the same source, both feeding back into the same output. Moving on to the next type of node, we're going to stay in this space and delete the bottom one. Back to a serial node now, and I'm going to make two adjustments. Just pull this red one over here. This is the feather of the mask. Just pull it all the way into around there. It gives us a sharper selection, and then increase the brightness even more. Let's say all the way to 1.7, like that is fine. And the node I'm talking about is an outside node. Now this one is pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to linger on it too much. But if you go over here to the gain and you pull it all the way down, you can immediately see what's happening. This node connected to this node is taking the outside of this selection, and we can tweak it however we wish. So essentially, the outside of the selection of the node it's connected to. So it can be a mask, it can be with a qualifier, magic mask, anything that you select in your first node, the outside node that it's connected to is going to give you control to the area opposite to the selection. Now, there are other ways to do this. You can take this node, duplicate it, and invert the mask, but this is the fastest way to get there. Taking this back to our image, if I were to quickly draw a mask around our subject, let's say I want to increase the saturation on her. This is something I would never do, but for this example, I'm going to do it. Then add an outside node and further desaturate the background. Not all the way, just over there. And all of a sudden you have this contrast between her and the background. And this is where outside nodes are really helpful. If you want to make a change inside the mask and outside the mask, that's when I immediately opt for an outside node. Moving on, we'll delete that and reset. And the next node I'm talking about is the layer node. From the get-go, it does look similar to a parallel node, but it doesn't work exactly the same. And instead of a parallel mixer, you have a layer mixer. What it does is it splits these two nodes up into layers. And here it's really important to understand the order of the layers. So we're going to start with this node at the bottom, and I'm going to make a drastic change. Let's just take it to magenta. Then I'm going to go to this top node, and I'm going to make a change all the way to the yellow. Look how nothing is happening. That's because this node is essentially on top of this node, even though the order is flipped around. So what you can do, and this is what I prefer, is you can disconnect this node and connect this one to the bottom and this one to the top, and look what happens. Now the top one is your top layer and the bottom one is your bottom layer. So your layer mixer is actually flipped around. The one here at the bottom will be your top layer, and the one here at the top will be your bottom layer. Now, since this one is at the top, if I were to take a power window and isolate, let's say, somewhere over here, everything around this will be revealed because that's on the bottom layer. And because this is on the top layer and it's isolated, I'm only going to see this part from the top layer displayed in the mask. Something else I can do is I can reset this, and let's key the jacket like what we did earlier, and Shift and H. Doesn't have to be perfect, just get most of it in. And now I'm going to just pull this image all the way to the yellow. And look how the jacket is staying blue now. So the jacket is not really being touched, at least the parts that are included into this key. Everything on the outside will be replaced by everything on the bottom layer. This also means that if I were to change the hue, let's make it that purple magenta color again, on the top selection, I can now blend it with this image at the bottom by going to the key and bringing down the key output. So that's basically the opacity of this layer. And I can bring it down, and all of a sudden it starts to blend, which can create a whole new bunch of creative opportunities. And by that, I'm not referring to this mess over here. So let's make it more practical in a way that I would actually use it. I'm going to the qualifier, and we're going to select the skin, and Shift H is going to highlight that. I'm not going for a perfect selection. This is just for illustration. And Shift H again and go to the primaries wheel to offset, and I'm just going to warm it up a bit more to the orange side. Not too much. That's before, that's after. So that's basically just the skin. And then I'm going to go to our background, because this is now the bottom layer. Everything outside of this selection is now going to reflect from this node. So if I were to pull it to the teal side, I don't want to overcook it. And now if I look at the image, we have our typical orange and teal look. So we have the orange skin and a teal background. And if you use this method, there are a few things you need to look out for, which I'm going to explain fully in chapter 5. But I just wanted to show you how you can use a layer node in a more practical way. And then for the last node, it's not exactly in the menu over here. Although if you right click over here, you can create it from scratch, but there's a faster way. So we're going to go over to color, and under node, select add splitter combiner node. What you have over here is you have a splitter node and a combiner node, and you have 3 normal nodes, and they're all connected to each other. These 3 are feeding from the splitter node, and they're feeding back into the combiner node. So by split, I'm talking about red, green, and blue. You can see the little dots there. Same on this side, red, green, and blue. So then this one would be the red channel, this would be the green channel, and this would be the blue channel. I'm not going to go in depth with this now. We'll save that for chapter 5 when we get to the creative grades, but for now you just need to understand the mechanics behind it. So I'm not going to make any tweaks here in the primaries because there are faster ways to do that without having this complicated node tree, but having control over the specific channels like this means that I can do something like blur on the blue channel. Look what happens if I push it up, if I pull it down. It's just affecting the blue channel. So I can make it softer or diffuse it. I can do the same here on sharpen. You can sharpen it, make it sort of a diffused look. It definitely depends on your shot, but you can also use this to eliminate chromatic aberration, something I'll cover in the tutorials going forward. But for now, it's just good to know that it exists and there is a place for it. And that's it for nodes.